Hari, please go ahead. He is, I believe, a private sector official. Hari.
Good afternoon, Mr. JP.
Good afternoon.
I deeply respect your commitment to the students and as well as the general community about clarifying the societal issues. My question today is primarily about the states getting into a lot of debts across the board, mortgaging every asset they have against their name. But one point which is bothering me is about as the macroeconomics. How does it matter if they don't pay? What happens? What are the repercussions if the states don't pay to the debtors? Primarily, they take it from the banks or financial institutions, or large government bodies, or foreign investment bodies, kind of stuff, right? So, what happens if these guys don't pay? What are the key repercussions on those states? Because at the end of the day, it's not about chief minister who's taking it on name, right? It's government who's taking it on their name. What are the repercussions if they don't pay? Thank you.
Good question, Harish. First let's understand what the government debt is about. In a growing economy, in a poor country, we need more money than we can raise by way of taxes. That's what poverty means. You require resources to build the economy, to build the infrastructure, to build good quality healthcare and education, and to create conditions for economic growth, investment, job creation, etc. Otherwise, we will stagnate. We will continue to remain poor. Therefore, debt is inevitable. But if the debt is recklessly utilized, not for the future growth and building up the country, but for current expenditure, or if we squander resources, a lot of resources, or a lot of corruption takes away much of the money, what happens is we as citizens collectively are burdened with a debt without the commensurate benefit. No family does it. We are all where we are despite our poverty as a country because generation after generation, our parents across caste, region, religion, language, they all worked very hard. They were thrifty. They continue to be thrifty. Our families are thrifty. The parents sacrificed their desires, their needs, in order to make a better life for the children. But if a government does not do that, if a government wastes resources and borrows recklessly, then we're in deep trouble. Obviously, we have to repay the debt with interest. Over time, interest burden becomes bigger than what we can afford. In many cases, if you take the salaries, the pensions, and the interest, in many states, it's much more than the total revenues of the state. If you take the own revenues of the state, excluding the transfers from Government of India, there are states where they have come to 176%. Just the committed expenditure of this kind, which you cannot give up. Now, Harish's question is, why can't we simply default? Refuse to pay. There is hell to pay. Look at Sri Lanka. Look at Pakistan. On our south, we have Sri Lanka, the island country, an otherwise wonderful country, full of natural bounties. But you are seeing what is happening now. Look at Pakistan on our northwestern border. What is happening now? What happens? Please remember, we also have large revenue deficit. That means the current expenditure also we have to borrow. Therefore, let alone building the future, even the current expenditure is not possible because the moment you refuse to repay, the lenders will refuse to lend you. Then the rating agencies will downgrade your rating as a sovereign government. The interest rates therefore will go up. Even if they lend in future, the costs will go up. Therefore, the burden on the people, on the exchequer, becomes much greater. And remember, there's nothing like state's default in India. It's a general government debt. While we have a state government with constitutional role, with clear responsibilities demarcated under 7th schedule, the overall debt is the general government debt. And that's the reason why the constitution makers made provisions by which the Government of India can regulate the state's debt under Article 293. And in extreme cases, when the state collapses fiscally, they can no longer manage the finances, they can impose what is called financial emergency, and the Government of India takes over the management of the finances of the state. It never happened in any state so far. It could happen. It's not a good thing for our democracy or for our federalism. Now, as I said before, if the states default, eventually it's the government of India's burden. That means India defaults. If India defaults, there are many consequences. I already mentioned to you, further loans will be stopped. We cannot even manage the current expenditure because we all are running revenue deficits. Our growth will stop because there's no investment. And even if we get loans in future, the creditors will increase the interest rates on the basis of poor credit ratings. And investors will stop investing because they have no faith in the government any longer. A country which is badly managed is not a country that can grow economically. That means incomes will not rise. That means people will not be able to buy. There's no purchasing power. Therefore, why should we invest in your country? And if the government cannot even fulfill its obligations, how can we trust the government? Therefore, investments will stop from outside and from within the country also. People lose faith in the government. And the state's capacity to spend for capital expenditure, because India has very poor infrastructure, your roads, your drains, your transport systems, electricity grid. If we want to switch over to the solar grid and a whole lot of infrastructure, it will be in disrepair. India, even today, is at the bottom among the 50 large economies in infrastructure. We are making efforts in recent years, but we are still down there at the bottom. We are in the bottom 5 of the 50 large economies in the world. If we continue to languish, that will perpetually be in poverty. We don't want to be an old Stone Age tribal civilization. We want to be a modern civilization, part of a great modern economy. If we have no aspirations for the future, higher incomes, elimination of poverty, people fulfilling their potential, economy progressing, technology marching ahead, education, healthcare improving, if that's not our vision, then the country will be a pariah, like North Korea. So growth will stall. Revenues, therefore, will fall. Revenues of the government are a function of the economic activity in the country, incomes and economic activity. If that stops, government revenues further fall. But expenditure cannot be curtailed because employees, salaries, fixed costs, other things. And therefore, the governments will get deeper and deeper into red. And the whole country will grind to a halt. Because of all these unrelated reasons, a time will soon come when you can no longer pay even wages of employees or pensions. Trust me, no modern government wants to default. That's a disaster. Once in a while, because of excruciatingly painful circumstances, external problems like COVID, beyond your control, or a war in Ukraine, supply chain disruption, or sudden dramatic rise in the price of oil or some other commodity, or the overall global recession or depression beyond your control, sometimes there are crises. But if you manufacture a crisis for your country because of bad management of your finances, you'll be a pariah internationally. Your growth will cease. You'll cease to be a civilized country. We should never, ever want to default. India has a proud record. We came close to crisis in 1991. Our foreign exchange reserves, they were enough just to manage 2 or 3 weeks of imports like in Pakistan today. That's when we changed course. And we improved things to some extent, but a lot more needs to be done. So default is not an option. Better management of finances is the only option available. And we can do it. Thank you for your questions. Please offer your comments, your criticism, and raise questions for debate and discussion. And let us spread the message. There's no final truth. We have to keep at it. We have to go by evidence and logic. We have to respond to emerging situations. And we have to understand the global practices and our own past experience. We have to find constructive and creative responses to our challenges. I'm a great believer, and as you believe, that there are rational, practical, acceptable, sensible, affordable solutions to most of our problems. But we must think of them very carefully, based on evidence and logic, with goodwill, without hyper-partisanship, without illogical approach, without excessive emotion or sentiment. And we must adapt the best practices relevant to our conditions. And we must learn from our own past experience, good and bad. I wish you all the very best. Thank you.